This is Ocean to Ocean, and I'm talking today with philosophy professor and good friend Harvey Jackson.
Well, hello, Art. I'm glad to be here.
Hey, Harvey. Hey, you're one of the few people I know who might wear their old uniform with fondness.
Well, it was merely a synchronous day. I was thinking about artificial intelligence, and my Verizon shirt just came out.
So I haven't listened to that. I listened to that talk you had with Emerson a while ago. Did you two cover that part of your story?
Not really. I might have mentioned it sort of biographically, but I really didn't get into any detail about it.
Well, just to give people context who are watching now, so you used to work at Verizon and you developed an artificial intelligence program for them. Is that right?
Yes, I spent 3 years working on a program that uses both neural networks and genetic algorithms and very advanced AI technology. And the purpose of it is to, in a simple way, is to predict what certain stocks or corporate bonds, the value is going to be the next day.
Yeah, and all of that just sort of happened very synchronistically in a way for you.
It did, and one of the things that came out of it, and actually a lot of things I did, was it allowed me, in the process of doing it, I kind of realized I was spending a lot of time on it. I was really working 7 days a week on it, on coding and so on, but and with a team of people that were working for me. But one of the things I realized was I didn't just want to sit in front of a computer all day. I wanted to teach. That was always in deep within me. And so by doing everything I did at Verizon, it allowed me to ultimately generate passive income, which would allow me to leave Verizon for a number of reasons, and then go into teaching, first at a high school in my county as a special education teacher, working with emotionally disturbed adolescents. And then from there, I wanted to teach at a college level, and I ended up teaching philosophy, which is a long story short.
Yeah, and that's it's really a remarkable story. You know, I was watching an interview with Joey Lott a few weeks ago, who I want to invite for this series. Yeah, I think he has a somewhat similar story where he got into some particular coding field very early that set him up in a way with the passive income that allowed him to explore his more mystical leanings. Yeah.
Wow, that's very, very much like me.
Yeah. And so, so at the start of our conversation, you mentioned, I didn't send you the Zoom link ahead of time, and you went to our regular meeting. Yeah, and you're one of the most consistent regular members of our weekly Zoom meeting, and the people who might be watching this on Nothing, they've seen me host a few of those on Fridays, but you're usually busy then. And our regular meetings are Wednesday nights and Sunday afternoons here in the States. So and you're really, like, I think, one of the linchpins of our meeting those days. And I've often called you my deputy, because if I have to be away from the camera for a while for some reason, you take over and do a great job. Would you like to, maybe in your own words, from your own perspective, for anyone who might be interested, explain what our bi-weekly meeting is?
Sure. And of course it's my perception of it, but what I've come to discover in the meetings, the bi-weekly meeting, Wednesday night and Sunday afternoons, is it is a way of different people to talk about non-duality or issues related to it. Sometimes it's a study of, could be of different teachings or quotations, or whatever people want to talk about. And it is not, and while Art, you're the facilitator, that's the way I look at you. You put the meeting together and kind of facilitate. It's not where you're the teacher or the leader. It's really an open forum for people to talk about whatever is showing up. And it could be non-dual issues. Sometimes it turns out to be issues of things in their families or other issues. Sometimes it's about music, about art, because it really encompasses everything. And for me, the distinction between satsangs, which can be very enjoyable, of course, is that it's more of an exploration without a definite direction. It's not, oh, we're going to do this teaching and go in this direction. It's more of an open forum. And that's, to me, what makes it so valuable, because it's not doctrinaire and it's not about one belief versus another, although there may be a discussion of different ways that people approach so-called non-duality. And that's what makes it very, very interesting. And I think the other thing I would point out is that a lot of people who join the meetings or the discussions have gone through a lot of searching and seeking, and they'll talk about it. And that to me is very fascinating, because to me, it's a reflection of all of us. And I'll just throw this in there. I just finished with a bunch of people watching that movie In and of Itself. And it was perfect. It's perfect, because that's about reflected identities and who am I and so on. So
yeah, I actually wanted to bring that movie up just because why not? And well, thanks for what you said about the meeting, first of all. And yeah, it is a place for people to explore whatever's happening for them, and that's pretty much what it is. Yeah. And yeah, and anyone who's interested to check it out, just send me a message on Facebook, or you could email me. Well, we'll put that in the description, although I need to get better about checking my email. But definitely message me on Facebook if you can, if you're interested. But yeah, this movie, let's give a plug for that movie, because I feel like anyone interested in this topic should definitely see it, or would enjoy it if they did. It's called In and of Itself. And so, without revealing too many of the details of it, like what was you said you watched it with some other people.
yeah, I did that. It wasn't planned, but I had some time that showed up today, because typically on Fridays I do office hours, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
virtually, that is. And I happened to mention it to somebody, because I'm actually going to show the film in one of my classes this after spring break. We're on spring break this week coming up. So I'm going to show it because I think it's very valuable in the way I teach. And so it's very unconventional of me to do this, but I'm going to bring, I've been able to obtain, I have a copy of the film now. And so I'm going to bring it into, I'll be showing it over Zoom, of course, but I think it's very valuable for my classes.
Yeah, definitely. And this, I've said this many times before. I mean, you're the philosophy professor I wish I had in college,
Well, thank you.
although I don't know what I would be a whole different person, because I feel like so much of my life, would have been different if I liked philosophy in college, which I didn't at all. I recently saw this interview with Brian Eno, where he was giving the same complaint that I had, where I guess his son was going to college somewhere in England, and he said it was very disappointing that the philosophy class was just the memorizing of what dead people wrote down hundreds of years ago.
That's very true. And I've been, as a student, I've been in many philosophy classes, and truthfully, I found many of them, if I could say, dry and boring. And a lot of times I would be like, well, who cares? I don't really care about what somebody said 2,000 years ago or whatever. And of course, now I realize as teaching that they were asking fundamental questions too. And a couple of them have literally affected the way we perceive reality now. And I always point that out. and that things they might have done literally were taught from generation to generation, and it formed the way that we perceive things. So I try to fit it into what's the relevance of what we're learning. Otherwise, it's a very dry subject. But I also realized too that I try to make it relevant. So I edit videos, I put pieces of movies together. I try to bring it into real life. And if I could just say what the way I do all my classes, and I teach many different kinds of philosophy courses, I start off with 5 questions, which we do throughout the semester. And I'll just tell you them real quickly. The first question is, who am I? And who am I? Or what is this I or me? And is there an I? So that's question 1. And then question 2 is, what is the nature of ultimate reality? And the third question is, what is the origin of suffering? Why do we suffer? And the fourth question is, what is my calling? Not the job that we do, but what is my deepest calling? And then the fifth question is, how do I make a difference in the world? And so everything I teach, those 5 questions are embodied in so many ways in everything I do. And by doing that, I have discovered people will resonate differently with different questions, depending on what their particular journey. It could be, what is my calling? How do I make a difference? And so on. And all of the questions ultimately, particularly the last one, point to that whatever we're doing, whatever this journey is not about us as the individual, but it is about that what we do is for the sake of all beings. And it's not about me becoming enlightened, or I'm going to do this, but what we're doing is to bring forth the opportunity for everyone to see, what are we? And then that seeing of what are we, or the who am I, is really for all beings. It's for the sake of all beings, because that by not seeing what you are becomes the origin of deep suffering, unnecessary suffering.
Yeah, or maybe assuming you know what you are as a separate entity or particular thing.
And that becomes the exploration, because everyone comes in, 99% of the people who come into a class, they're like, yeah, I'm me, I'm me.
Yeah.
I'm me, and the world's out there, and you better not screw around with me.
Yeah.
But the belief that I'm a separate I, or a me, a permanent or independent me, okay,
Yeah.
the sense of a me, but that becomes, that's what most people come into. And I always point out from almost the first week that in other worldviews, that in African worldviews, the I is the community, and in some Asian worldviews, Zen, Buddhism, in certain areas of Hinduism, indigenous peoples, they don't see the I as a separate entity, but it's part of a sacred circle. And so what I'm telling everybody ultimately is that we want to become what I call multilingual, in being able to say, yes, there are many different views, and I can begin as a student to think and experience as if I was in these other worldviews. So it gives people a chance to loosen up their identification with what they think they are, and now begin to experience other possibilities. And that, for some people, can be an academic exercise, or for some people, they will all of a sudden go, oh my gosh, the word they use is, I've been mind raped. It's like everything I believed in is falling apart. And now I don't know what to believe. And I always tell them, that's where you want to go, where you can say, I don't know. And that's the beginning of infinite possibility.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I like how you also often mention the beginner's mind and the importance of that.
Absolutely. The beginner's mind, which is a mind that's open to any possibility. And it's a way, I'll give you a very quick example. Very often nowadays in college and high school, if you make a mistake on a test, you go, oh, I'm so terrible. It's awful what I've done, etc. But I always go, I always tell people, instead of like beating yourself up, say, I'm just a beginner. Of course, as a beginner, like a little kid, of course I'm going to make mistakes, and that's great, and it's good. So as a beginner's mind, everything is a new possibility. Everything becomes kind of new in that we're saying, I'm learning for the first time. So every day is a brand new day.
Yeah. 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 And yeah, so I'm less familiar with this African version of the I you mentioned that is like a group concept of I. Could you expand more?
Sure, sure. If I'll give a very simple example. If you remember, if you came home from school, and this could be applied to anybody, and you told your parents, I did terrible, I failed the test or whatever. Now, the parent might say to the neighbors, hey, my daughter, my son's having trouble. And they'll go, yeah, my kids are having that challenge too. But in the traditional African cultures, like in the country of Ghana, Nigeria, if the tribe or the community finds out that, let's say you, Art, in your family, you're having trouble in school, then your challenge is everybody's challenge, that everybody's going to help you. That the neighbors, it's not just, oh, you're the son of my neighbor across the street, you're my son also. And so everybody participates in helping you out. Why? Because who you are is who you are is not just the biological family, you are a member of the community. And so everybody looks at you as what can we do to support you? So very often the I or the me is defined not as the separate individual, but the me is my community, my tribe.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the positive version of that thing that happens in sports where, like, if like on the football team, if one person shows up late, everyone has to run laps. That's the more like punitive version of what you're describing. But
well, that's a good example too, because if you do poorly, and let's say you take the next test and you did poorly, then in a sense you could say, we might say, well, I disappointed mom and dad, but now you've disappointed the community. And that has also can have other kind of repercussions, because now you could say, well, everybody's on my case. My neighbors, everybody's like, you disappointed the whole community. And that can also lead to other kind of issues. And what's interesting, that particular way is a hybrid between the Western individuality and sort of the, we'll call it the Asian, and then it's an arbitrary definition, with the Asian view of that there's no me or an I in traditional Buddhism, or in some areas of the Advaita Vedanta part of Hinduism. So it's a kind of a hybrid approach. It just happened that way. And you also see it in Native Americans and people of the Americas, who also grew up in that kind of a hybrid approach of the individual, the non-individual, and then sort of, well, the individual as the community.
I like how you just drew a heart there when you did that.
Well, it is, because it all is the heart. It all comes together. It all comes together in a very deep, profound way, because we get to see that who and what we are may not necessarily be what we were taught by our particular society. We may see there's a lot more. We're not just the solitary individual.
Yeah. And I often think of that word Thich Nhat Hanh uses of interbeing.
Yeah, and the interbeing, and one of the things I do in classes, and I actually use Thich Nhat Hanh and the interbeing, and everyone goes, oh, that's nice. What does that really mean? So we all get in a big circle. I have when I'm in a class, and I do it on Zoom now. It's a little bit different. And we get in a circle, and I'll say, everybody, we're going to do like a little Simon Says, and everyone goes, oh, great. So I'll say, I'm going to do something, and I'm going to point to something, and then you do exactly what I do. So I start, and I'll go, I point to myself. They'll say, they'll do it. I point to myself, and I'll do it again. I point to myself. And then after 2 or 3 times, then I look around and I'll go, I point to myself, and I'll actually point to somebody in the room. And then everybody says, I point to myself. And then I'll go, I point to myself, and I point to another person. Okay. And they repeat it and do it. And then I go, I point to myself. I'm pointing like to a fluorescent light on the ceiling. I point to myself. And then I'll point to a computer. I point to myself. And they're all doing it after me. And then at the very end of it, I'll go, and what is the self? And people will go, it's everything. Everything is the self. I point to myself. And I always tell a little story, I'll tell real quick, of a kid in a previous class who at the end of it said, I think that's all bullshit, you know. And he came back to the next class and he told a story, and he says, every Saturday, my mom says I should clean my room. And I always tell her why, because it's only going to get dirty again. So what's the point? And they argue every weekend. And then she goes, if you don't do it, you know, I'm going to do a detailed cleaning of your room myself, and I'll find things you're probably hiding, whatever that might be, of course. And he argues, and then she says, you live in my house, you'll do it my way, or you can get out. So every week they do it. So this Saturday, after that class, after we did the intra-being exercise, he gets in the same argument with his mom. They're arguing and they're getting angry as always. And all of a sudden, he says to himself, who am I arguing with? I'm arguing with myself. And he says to his mom, okay, I'm going to go clean my room. Now, normally they're arguing, and she was like shocked. He just said, I'll do it. And she said to him, what are you smoking? Have you been smoking stuff? Because she was so shocked. But what he said was that when you realize that everything around you is me, then why do I need to argue? It's all me. It's like, wow. And he cleaned his room. And he said from that point on, whenever he was he's going to talk to people, I point to myself. It's all me. Everything is me. And he said, I remember him saying to the class, what the fuck did I not see that before? It was right in front of me. And that's all the interbeing.
That's remarkable. Yeah. So it's a great story. And in fact, over the years, you've had quite a few students who've had, you know, experiences or awakenings of interbeing or no thing awareness. Would you like to say anything about that in general? Your experience as a teacher, you know, like a literal like philosophy teacher, and as well as you also do some private what's the word?
Mentoring and
mentoring, yeah.
Yeah, mentoring and some counseling as well.
Yeah.
And I do that almost every day of the week when I'm not teaching. I'm always involved with people. But in classes, what I've discovered that while people very often can hear, if I do talk about the me or I talk about other cultures, because I have a reason to talk about it when I talk about Buddhist philosophy, as an example, people might understand academically what I'm saying and they could repeat it on the quiz. But there have always been a number of people who all of a sudden something happens. It could be the next day, it could be a year, and all of a sudden something will click. And I'll tell you a very quick example because I think it's useful. I had a kid in a class and his name was Paul, and he would always sit in the very back of the room by the door so he could quickly escape. And he once said, I have no interest in going to school. I'm only here because my parents said, if you don't go to college, you're going to have to pay rent. So of course he went. So he didn't say much in class. And one day when I was doing a chapter in my book about the nature of, is there a God or gods? It was part of metaphysics. And I played a very short video with a quotation from the Kena Upanishad, which says, what is that which hears? Not what hearing adores, but what is that which hears? And it goes on to say, that is Brahman, the eternal. And then it goes, what is that which sees? not what seeing adores, but what is that whereby seeing occurs. So it goes through all the senses plus the thinking sense, because in that culture, thinking is a sense too. So I played it twice, the video. It was 1.5 minutes. And then I talked about it for a few minutes, and then was getting towards the end of the class, and Paul raises his hand, first time, I think, in the semester. And I said, oh, Paul, what do you have to say? And he goes, you know, you just wasted our time. I think that was just pure bullshit what you showed. Okay. And I said, well, thank you for sharing. And now the class is over. I'll see you, Wednesday. Well, he left the class and he had to go to work, and I would find this out later. And he was driving about 20 minutes away to where he was working. And he would later tell me that the quotation from the Upanishad, he actually had memorized every word that I had shown. And he goes, what the hell is going on? I couldn't care less about this stuff, but it was playing over and over again in his mind. And so he got to work, he did his work, he goes home later that evening and he's tired. He says, okay, I got to go to bed. So he goes to bed, which he normally did. And he says he can't sleep because he's now playing the quotation over and over. And he goes, what is wrong here? What is that which sees? What is the that which hears? And I had said to the class, remember the word that. What is the that whereby seeing occurs? So he's in bed, it's playing over and over again. And then he turns the light on and he says, oh my God. Now it was his bedroom because everything looks beautiful. Everything is brand new. I know what is going on here. And he came to class that Wednesday and he sat in the front of the class and he said, I have to tell everybody what happened. He goes, I have been searching all my life to be happy. He was in high school. He was bullied because he was somewhat overweight. And he said, I've been searching, why do people do certain things and so on? And he goes, all of a sudden, everything, I know the answers. The answer is this. It's like everything is beautiful. There's no more, and this is what he would say, there's no more inner, no outer, no good, no bad, no this, nor that. It's just what is. It's just, it's the words, it's everything just is. It's wonderful. It's like, he says, how come you can't see this? It's been here all the time. He goes, it's so obvious. He goes, I'm 22 years old and I didn't ever see it before. But he goes, there's no, yes, I have a body, but it's not separate from anything else. It's everything it's just perfect. It's exactly what it's supposed to be. And he goes, my entire life has been turned upside down. And he goes, no, that's wrong. It's been turned right side up because now I see reality. And so he would go on. He graduated that semester, went on to Towson University in Maryland, and he's come back to Howard Community College where I teach to actually go before classes and talk about what he calls no inner, no outer, no over here or over there. He says, it's just one thing, but it's not a thing. It's just, and he said that Upanishad, that quotation, he says, I awoke, but what I awoke to what is, I awoke to what I really am, to what everything is. It's everything is just, it's right here. And he said, you just look and see it. It's always been there. So that was one of the students of one of many who a pointer, because to me the Upanishad was a pointer, and we were only talking about it for a historical reason of it. We were talking about the Upanishads, and and I still, now when I talk to him, and he'll talk about his courses at Towson, I'll go, well, how are you doing in the courses? Do you like it or don't like it? He goes, no, stop. He says, I'm taking courses. There's the like and dislike. There's no like or dislike. It's just what it is. And if there's a feeling that it's a like or dislike, that's what's there too. But everything, if I got an A on a paper, wonderful. And if I fail, Wonderful, because that's what happened. And he goes, everything is happening exactly the way it should. You just look at everything, it's right in front of you. So
Wow.
that's an example. And I've actually published his story. It's out on the web. You can actually find the story under my name. It's out there. And it's you know, and a lot of people have read it, his story. And it's interesting because it's an ordinary person. And in a way, everything, even for Paul, is still ordinary, but it's also now extraordinary.
Yeah, I'm making a note so we could maybe make sure we link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll send you the link.
Okay, great.
I have an amplified version of the story that he wrote. So
any
I'll
of you, anyone who's listening or watching can find that link in the description.
Right.
Yeah, so wow, well, that's an incredible story. Very cool. Yeah, and what was the Upanishad again that he was?
The Kena, Kena, and it's one particular verse in it. But if you kind of search around, you'll find from the Sanskrit, in the English it says, what is that whereby hearing occurs? Not what hearing adores, not the contents. It says, don't worry about the contents, but what is that whereby hearing occurs, seeing occurs, smelling occurs, thinking occurs, tasting occurs. What is the that? And so what happens with the Upanishad is that there's sort of like, you go, well, why is it saying that? What is this that? And why does it say it's Brahman the eternal? And I actually use it as a Zen koan I teach a course in Japanese and Buddhism, and for Asian studies students and philosophy students, and I actually use it as a koan. And sometimes when I've taught, if I'm doing stuff on the web, if I'm doing any kind of seminars, I actually use this koan on there, and I actually have the video that I used with it and the words. And I think it's important because very often people think, well, whether it's a koan or it's something in the Vedas, I will have to study it for decades or my whole life or many lifetimes. But the approach is that no, it's available right now. You think you have to go from point A to point B over years, but in a way, it's like it's a backwards teaching, because you realize that the answer, what you're looking for, is right here. It's right here. This is the it. It's right here. And the willingness or to entertain the possibility that which you've been looking for, you already are. It's right here. And all of a sudden, you don't have to say, oh, I need decades to get this. It's available immediately. But in a way, there's that sort of looking and seeing, that stepping into the space of, I really don't know what it means. Let me keep looking. Not seeking to read more books or hear more teachers or quotations, but to genuinely look. It's that inquiry. It really comes down to, like Ramana would say, who am I? What is this I? What is it? In Zen, they say it's like swallowing a red hot iron ball and you can't vomit it up, in one of the koans, the koan mu, because it takes hold of you. Who am I? Who is asking this question? And so that inquiry begins to, it's like stirring hot embers. I think Ramana actually uses an example. You stir these red hot embers, and that what you're stirring it with gets burned away. And so the I begins to, in a sense, the perception of what the I is begins to unravel.
Yeah, no, definitely. What you're saying reminds me a lot of Ramana. And he would always, when people would ask questions, his most common response would be to inquire to who is the one asking the question.
Sure, yeah.
And that does go back. Yeah, it's this other thing you said earlier I found really interesting, because I sort of, what's been coming up for me recently is a lot more like my social life has taken a little back step, and all of a sudden I find myself being more alone at night, more silent, and not even needing to talk to someone. Well, or being okay with it rather. But it's like in the silence, I just noticed this kind of noticing of sensation and in my body and my perceptions that's just very enjoyable, whatever it is. And also, but what you said about thought, it made me think about Vipassana meditation, which I don't know too much about, but I understand it involves focusing on the sensation in the body to a large extent. But also I was noticing how thoughts, they don't feel that different. They feel like, oh, this is just what's happening. And just like a feeling in the toe or a sound, tinnitus in the ear, it's just, they're, so I thought it was interesting that you pointed out that in some of these traditions in India, that they viewed thinking as another sense.
Yeah, and in some areas, some schools of Buddhism do that too. And I think you mentioned something very important. In Vipassana meditation, it usually comes after what's called shamatha meditation, which is a kind of focusing where you learn how to focus on your breath and focus on different sensations. But there's a distinction in Vipassana, and you actually picked up on it. You don't really focus, you just notice. Just notice. The noticing is like a gentle, you're surfing the waves. And you notice what's there. You don't try to focus on the breath or focus on the sound, you just notice. And in the noticing, then whatever is noticed, it could be your thoughts, it could be a dog barking, the frog croaking, a light shining in your window, then everything is just what it is. That's what shows up. So then everything is, I would say, fully awakened. That is, everything is just what it is. So now it's no longer having to get rid of thoughts or trying to say this thought is good, that thought's not good. No, it's just noticing. And the noticing is easy because you just notice. You don't have to do anything. It's not a doing. It's a sort of relaxed awareness of just seeing what shows up. And I always tell people, don't grasp at it and don't push it away. And if you are grasping at whatever you're noticing, that's it too. Notice that you're grasping.
Right.
The noticing is the seeing. And you don't know what you're going to notice next because it could be, it's like you could be in a quiet room and a truck goes by. Well, that's what you notice too. Because the silence is not the opposite of noise. The silence is whatever it's what is. That in that presence, it's in everything. So now there's no distinction between the frog croaking, the light, the truck, the thoughts, the itch on the elbow. Everything is just, that's what's there. And what's going to come next? It's whatever comes next. And so there's a noticing that everything is complete. The itch is the perfect itch. And the truck noise that made me feel a sense of, ooh, disturbance. Well, that's what was there too. And so then everything is fully included, nothing excluded. Everything is fully inclusive in this awareness or noticing, whatever you would call it. The words don't matter. In the stillness, in the presence, it's all included.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, and how does one know if, I was talking to someone earlier today where they were, we're talking about a situation in their life and whether they needed to do something about it or not. And they were saying, well, if I try to do something about that, is that seeking, And I said, well, in this whole like non-dual world, seeking seems to mean an expectation that something needs to happen and that's going to end all suffering or end all problems, that there's an ultimate end point called enlightenment, or there's no longer a contracted energy in the body and so now everything's awesome forever, or but it's really not like that. It's more of a there's practical things that we do that's just whole in itself, and if we don't do them, there's still wholeness.
It's wonderful. It's a good word, wholeness, because it's wholeness showing up in everything. If one has a problem, quote unquote, and one is looking for, what do I do? Those kind of, Well, that's what showed up. And that's included too. That you notice that there's a looking of what comes next. Or if one says, I don't know what to do, I'm just going to sit in my chair. Well, that's what showed up. You see, there's no right or wrong then. It's the seeing that there's an unfolding in this wholeness, because the wholeness is infinite. It includes everything. It includes the possibility that one could say, I don't know what to do. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Well, that's how it showed up. Now, somebody would say, well, who's the I that's, going to do that? There's no doer. Well, that's, that's all conceptual. That's the mind playing its game, trying to figure out, does it fit into the Advaita or a non-dual philosophy, or does it not? It doesn't matter. What shows up is what shows up. And if there's a sense of, I need to choose or I can't choose, then that's life living you. It's like, you're not the doer, you're the done. That's the way I would look at it. You're the action figure. So the action figure is life is living. You're not the dancer, you're the dance. So there's a discovery of where the dance will go. And maybe the dance will be, I'll sit in my chair and wonder, what should I do? Or the dance may be, I will get up and be an activist. Who knows? But no matter what shows up, it's all in that infinite space of possibility of wholeness. Or in quantum physics, the quantum field. It's all possibility. Once one realizes that, instead of trying to say, does it fit into a philosophy of non-duality, or it doesn't, that's the mind trying to capture it and say, oh, I get what non-duality is. Instead, it's like, don't know for sure, but let's see what shows up next. And that willingness to notice what the mind body may be doing or may be responding, you just notice. The noticing is not you noticing, it's like a noticing that's not you. It's just a noticing without a noticer. It's just, or looking or seeing or whatever word, the words don't matter, but it's an ing, it's a verb, it's a movement, and ultimately there's no real individual doing it, but it may feel like it. And if that's what it feels like, that's what it feels like, until it doesn't.
Yeah. And you mentioned the word, one of your 5 questions to your students, the 4th one, I think, was what is your calling, or and so it reminds me of the talk I had with Jazz Brown, and how he seemed to have this calling to be an artist. He didn't even go to art school. He said he bought $300 of painting supplies and went from there. And it turned into a not just a career, but a calling for him, that as his, awakening continued throughout that time, I believe. I mean, it became a way for him to try to express that, with painting, where he says the background of his paintings are black because that's the nothingness. And then there's the dancing on top of it, of all the shapes and colors.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because I tell people, you can read in a lot of books about finding your calling, and there's many, many books about, finding the calling. But I always tell them, and I actually got this from Joseph Campbell, the calling, you don't ever find your calling. The calling finds you. It's like a telephone ringing. It says, answer me, answer me. Like the old phone booth and so on. And speaking of art, since you mentioned that, I had a kid in the class, and he said when he was in elementary school, he used to sit near this girl who could really, really draw well. And he couldn't. He could just draw like Gumbies or like stick figures. And then when he got to middle school, he happened to be next to her, just happened to be in her class, and she was drawing beautiful drawings, and he was drawing stick figures. But now he kind of liked her. So he figured, well, if I could just draw, I could get her to like me, and who knows where that will go. So he tried, he still couldn't draw. He got these books about how to draw, it didn't work. Then he got the draw by numbers, and he still couldn't even get that to work. And then finally he gets into high school, and she's around, and he tried everything. He couldn't draw at all. So finally he tells her, all my life I've wanted to get to know you, and I wanted to draw by you, but I can't. I've tried everything, it doesn't work. And she says, well, let me tell you one thing. Give up the story that you can't draw. Give up the story that you're not an artist, because every possibility is who we are. And she says, just get a pad and don't worry about anything. Forget about, I'm not an artist. And then he said, over the next couple of days, he'd draw first a stick figure, and then the next day it had more characteristics, and the next day, and the next day, and all of a sudden he realized by not trying to be an artist, he became the artist. And then he went from my college to MICA in Baltimore, which is an art school for artists, and now he's got paintings in museums in Baltimore.
Wow.
And he said, when you give up this story of what you're, of that you're not, that you couldn't be this and you couldn't be that, when you realize that you are everything, then everything happens. And he actually wrote this, and he says, if you look at everybody, we are all in a melting pot of love. That's the wholeness.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, it reminds me of Marlon Brando's advice about acting, that we're all actors, we just don't realize it.
Yes, and you know what? We all put on the masks, whether we're doing real, acting in a performance, but we wear masks. And as sometimes Rupert Spira will say, we forget we have the mask on. We forget what's behind. We don't look to see what's behind the mask. Right.
And I think what you just said about give up the idea of what an artist is, this is very much what people say about this awakening, enlightenment, non-dual realization is, I forget who I was talking to, but that's how they put it. I asked if they had any advice for any seekers of this, and they said, well, just give up. I think Nancy Nethercutt said this. She said, just give up all of your ideas of what that means.
Sure. And she would say, give up the handholds, the same thing.
Yeah.
The paradox in it is that when people hear that, they'll go, oh, okay, so what do I need to do to give up?
Yeah. How do I do that? Yeah.
How do I do it? And what happens is then the so-called I tries to find methods of giving up the handholds and so on. And that becomes a dog chasing its tail, because the more you try, the more you're reinforcing the presupposed I.
Yeah.
And it's like Hederman would say, the more you do it, you're claiming it as I will do it. And that claiming of the doing this back to an I, even if you say, I will give up everything, I will give up the handholds. Well, the thing is, the more you try, the more you reinforce the separation. And so for example, when Nancy's in her beautiful songs and poetry is to maybe, there's a resonance that may occur. But if one sees it as a prescriptive approach, I need to do something, then you're back into really the seeking. It just looks nicer, but it's the same old stuff you've done before.
Yeah. It's, well, okay. So there's a few more things I wanted to get to that have just been coming up lately that's going to tie in with all this anyway. Mm-hmm. It all interconnects. Someone brought up I was talking to someone about who was asking me about these conversations I've been having, this podcast, and I told him, well, one way to look at it is that there is no doer, and then he brought up existentialism. He said, oh, it's like predeterminism versus existentialism, and I thought that was an interesting way to put it. So I was curious, because I don't hear existentialism being brought up very much in non-duality in general, and yet, I mean, so I guess my question to you is, what is existentialism, and if no one's choosing anything, how would that tie in with this?
Well, existentialism basically says that you are born without any preconceived essence. There's no soul or anything that you come into. There's no Atman. You're just here. You're born. And putting aside genetic influence, you have the ability, because you we're born without any preconceived essence. As you're growing older, you can choose what your identity is going to be. It is a doer, you choose, and you are completely accountable for whatever happens, because you can't say the devil made me do it, God made me do it, the aliens, the reptiles made me do it. It's none of that. You create your own identity. And when you don't take accountability for your own identity, it is called bad faith in existentialism. It starts from the philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre. So in existentialism, we create our own identity. Sometimes it's called atheistic existentialism. On the other hand, there is a type of existentialism called religious existentialism, and it comes from people like Paul Tillich, a theologian from the 20th century, who basically says that in order to find our authentic self, whatever that is, we need to remember our ground of being. Now, you could say that's the word God, or you could call it whatever. He says as a theologian, look to the ground of being. But what is that? One must then look. It's like the self, like Ramana would say, the self, not the little, not the individual conventional self, but to look. So he calls it the ground of being. And in Sufism, it says, find the root of the root of the root of oneself. And it comes from Rumi. Find the root of the root of the root of oneself. It's called zikr. In Islamic Sufism, it's called that to remember, who am I? See, it's called remembrance. That whatever you do, to always remember the root of the root of the root of oneself. But then, of course, what is that? That's what you have to.
Yeah, this comes back to self-inquiry. Who am I?
Yes, absolutely.
And so, So even with like an atheist existentialism of Sartre, there still would be this unknown there of who is this one that gets to choose what is happening or what it all means. Where does this choice come from? Who is it?
Sure, that gives you, as Sartre would say, tremendous responsibility, because now you are that search now is, you can't say Art Pinsof told me, or Rupert told me, or Adyashanti told me, or Nancy told me, or Michael Markham. No, now it's on, this journey is one that you, whatever that is, you start with, you're accountable for it. You cannot say, I got my learning from somewhere else. You are fully now, totally, it's your journey you're accountable, and you have to take that journey with such responsibility and commitment, because you can't depend on anybody else to tell you the answer, because their answer may not be maybe fine for them, but it's not who you are. So now you're looking, what can I do with this me, this I? That's very, very, very existential. If you look at Rick and Morty, that's one of the questions that Rick asks in, I think, season 3. After everything, traveling the universes, he goes, but what's it really about? What's really important? And then, because he's traveled in all these dimensions, and but ultimately, the question is, who am I? That's what he's asking. What was it really about? What are all these journeys all about?
Yeah.
So you see, it comes down to, because he's always has that depression and sadness and so on, and in there. And so the questions become very relevant, whether one comes from a spiritual modality or a religious framework or an atheistic one. The questions, the dissatisfaction, or in Buddhism called the dukkha, that suffering is always there for everybody, because they're looking for wholeness.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I guess the go-to conclusion for someone that's truly atheist or something like that, they're probably just going to say, well, or they might say that it doesn't mean anything. And that might be depressing to a lot of people. Like the idea that there's no meaning to it, or that all of this is just a cause and effect sequence with no discernible beginning or end, that's just, like marbles bouncing against each other eternally or whatever.
Yeah, that could be kind of a nihilistic approach. There's no meaning, no purpose, and it could be very depressing. But even that, if one takes sort of a neti approach, not this, or not that, and saying not that either. In other words, reject. It's like saying whatever shows up in the mind, however you want to philosophically, whatever conclusions sort of come up, say not that. In other words, to keep moving to keep staying in that cloud of unknowing, the name of a book from hundreds of years ago, in that cloud of unknowing, to say, I don't really know, even if it seems nihilistic, don't know, maybe it's not that either, not to land anywhere. The one vulnerability in a lot of teachings, including in non-dual teachings, is that people tend to will land on certain teachers, land on certain books, certain quotations, but in the end, if it becomes a handhold, okay, then it sounds very nice. It's like we have a nice spiritual mask on, maybe, but in the end, it's to not land anywhere. And every day, it's not evolving in a sense, and yet it may appear like that, as Jim Newman might say. Sometimes it appears that way, but ultimately, every moment is the first time. It's the first instant. It's always in that space of unknowingness, of not knowing. And that not knowing is, going back to the Kena Upanishad, that not knowing, you could say, is Brahmani eternal, or stillness, presence, awakenessing, awake. And what are you awake to? You're awake to this. And it's not that you are awake, because it's all this wholeness, it's beyond any description.
Right. Yeah. So the danger is always to land anywhere, no matter what, whether it's nihilism or some experience or idea of awakening even. And so, so with that in mind, Rick Archer, he brings up this Tibetan Buddhism quote quite often of to not mistake understanding for awakening, and be careful not to mistake awakening for liberation. And so I feel like you were just touching on that, but would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, well, first, understanding is also a guy named Mu Xin, who also in his writings talks about, there's a lot of number of philosophers in that will say understanding is the booby prize, because you can understand lots of stuff and nothing really happens except concepts in your mind. I think that the words like awakening, liberation, I may use the word awakeness or awakening periodically, but words like liberation, I often, and I used to interpret it as, well, when I'm liberated, the angels will sing, the harps will be going, and I'll be levitating towards my ceiling and whatever.
Yeah.
It's a way, the enlightenment is, or whatever you would call it, because I don't even like that word, but it's a seeing of what is, but not just looking at it. It's a seeing that even the I, or the sense of a me, it's like looking through the eye. Sometimes I'll tell people, look as if you're looking through yourself. Like just looking, not that there's a looker, just look, what's showing up. And it's awake to what is, whatever that is, whatever. It could be the itch of my foot, or that truck again outside the window. It's awake to what is. And that's all you need. That's it. There's nothing more that one has to calculate what to do. In that awakenessing, because it's a movement, then we'll see what's next. There may be insights, or Buddhism says there's a rising of wisdom and compassion. But whatever shows up, we'll see. But just looking. And right now you're looking through the eyes of art. It's like you're looking, and the eyes of art are like a camera, like an aperture. And you're just looking through that. It's life, reality, looking through all the billions of beings to see what it's like to be reality, whatever it is. But even that's speculation. but in just being awake to what is, just awake, noticing, not to worry about anything else. Liberation, enlightenment, what comes next? Does it deepen? Does it not deepen? Is it sudden? Is it gradual? Who knows? Just look and see, notice what is in this moment, what's here right now. And then don't worry about, and don't go into the mind where the mind will try to figure it out and capture it. And that, to me, that in a sense of that looking, is every moment is a discovery. You wake up in the morning, instead of thinking about, oh my God, work, it's going to be terrible, will there be traffic? There's a waking up to, I wonder what today will bring. I wonder. Then it becomes, every moment is a discovery. And the discovery may not be what the mind thinks it's going to be. It could be a flat tire, and that's what showed up. That's what is. And if you're angry at the flat tire, that's what showed up. And if you didn't have your AAA card, that's what showed up.
You turn the page and you see what the next chapter holds.
Turn the page and find out, because everything is there. It's like everything happens exactly the way it needs to. And why does it happen? Because it does. In that sense, everything and this may not be true, but I often think that everything's happening to support the story of the journey of the character, of the action figure. Everything is happening as the story of life, so-called story, it's a metaphor, is playing itself out. And so what's going to happen next? We'll turn the page and find out.
Wholeness is being expressed through this story of separation that is always changing.
Absolutely. And so now, whether or not the story of separation is a dream, and I hear that frequently, it may be a dream, or in a dream, I don't worry about that, because it could be, maybe, I don't know. What I do know is I can ask, what's here right now? What is being noticed? And so whether my mind might say it's all a dream, I may hear about it on the web that it's a dream, don't know. Because all I know is this. And it's like this it's like the kaleidoscope of that wholeness in billions of different ways. And that's it. And then we'll see what happens next. I don't worry about whether life is a dream, not a dream, because then my mind will take over and I'll have to go get another book off Amazon to read about it. And I do read a lot of books, but again, that noticing that the mind, which is also fully included, the mind is also reality expressing itself as concepts and separation and boredom and whatever else. And that's there too. Everything is included. And it's not even things, but it's fully inclusive, nothing left out. It's infinitely whole. And in that wholeness, anything can show up.
Yeah. And
that's the way I kind of teach it, because, people will say, but why did this happen? Why did my mom get into an accident? Why does this happen or that happen? And, the real truthful answer is because it did. We start there, because often we'll say it shouldn't have happened. It couldn't have happened, but it did. And I've learned from a psychological perspective, if we start with what is, then we're telling the truth about what's so. And telling the truth about what's so is our alignment with what is. What's showing up.
Why do you think Byron Katie titled her book Loving What Is?
Because when she does that, is that we often, with what is, we live in resistance to what is. We often go into it could be this, it should have been that, and so on and so on. One of the things in that book, and she points out, it may seem trivial, but it's very important. She mentions that one day she's going to an airport and she has to pick up her luggage. And she says on the way to the carousels, if my luggage is there, how wonderful, how great that would be. And if it turns out my luggage is not there, and lost, how wonderful. Because whatever shows up, that's what showed up. That's perfect. And another one, she points out, she was washing dishes and one of the dishes slips out of her hand, hits the counter and shatters into pieces and it's all over the floor. And she looks at that and goes, what, how beautiful, what a possibility. Every piece to be able to take my beautiful broom and to take every piece and look at the reflection of the light on the piece. What, how wonderful, how wonderful. And the broom was in the perfect place under the closet door. And the garbage can was open and ready for it. Everything that is there as a gift. Loving what is seeing that everything is doing exactly, it's perfect and complete, just as it is. And the broken dish was in the perfectly broken pieces. It was completely exact, each piece was completely what it needed to be. And so if one sees that way, and even the thoughts that come up, oh, I've dropped my beautiful dish. Well, that's perfect, the perfect thought. In that it's perfect, that's what showed up. And that's loving what is in a sense saying everything is exactly perfect and complete, including my thoughts. And that's loving what is. It's not a thing we do, it just happens. Because everything is seen as a gift. Everything is seen, or as, if I could use a religious statement that Rupert sometimes has used, it's the face of God in everything. Everything is the face of God. The broken dish, the mean person, the person who's doing what we would call conventionally terrible things. It's all of reality experiencing its kaleidoscope of possibilities.
Yeah.
And in that, we see the wholeness that everything, even when the mind says it's not, everything is this infinite wholeness. It's wholeness showing up in every possible thing. There's no exclusion. And when it even appears like exclusion, that's it too. Even separation, in the Taoism, it says the oneness shows up as the 2, 3, 4, and the 5. The one shows up as the 2, the yin and the yang, and the 3 and the 4 and the 5. But it's all the one. It's not just in balance, yin and yang. It's the one showing up as the opposites. And so if we look and see, even separation is the one showing up as separation. And then we don't have to say, oh, I've got to find that where's that oneness? I'm seeing all the separation. No, that's the oneness showing up as the lamp, the desk, the chair, the label. And now, no worry about, is it the brain? Is it ultimate reality? It's just, there's a knowingness that is, it's a knowingness, but not a knowingness of the activity of the mind.
Yeah.
It's always there. It's always right in front of you and behind you, in you, above you, below you, beside you, and in you. It's all one and the same thing. It's not even a thing though.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on, maybe, Harvey.
Great.
This was a really great conversation we've had.
It was wonderful, doing the conversation, and of course I want to tell you that to thank you for not only the opportunity to do the conversation, but for you to also know that what you do with all the things that you're doing, you're making a difference in the lives of others. And many of the people who talk to you are going through a lot of, whether it's trauma, loneliness, depression, and so on. And the willingness for you to bring everybody into that wholeness of allowing everything to be just what it is at that moment, not trying to change anything or saying it's bad or good. And what you're doing is you're becoming, in a sense, that facilitator and really a teacher for all. And that brings wisdom and compassion to all beings.
Well, thank you, Harvey. I feel like this is what you are doing, and you're an inspiration to me, and really appreciate your friendship.
Thank you.
And is there anything else you'd like to, I guess, plug or say before you? Is there anything you'd like to direct people towards who want to follow you?
Well, you can find me on Facebook, although I don't really put a whole lot on there. I have a lot of people who tend to follow me, and I do have an Instagram, but I don't do it very much. I don't really look for followers. I'm very, I mean, people can always find me on social media, but most of all, I tend to work with the people, my students and so on.
Yeah.
And that keeps me very busy. But it also becomes my own meditation. It's a meditation for all of us to do. But I would just say people should come to the groups that actually, the groups you facilitate on, the Friday group on Nothing Media and the groups that you're doing. And I think that people will find in that the resources, not so much to seek, but really it becomes a meditation of discovery to find who they are. So it's not really about me or even you as the individual, but by doing this together, we're all doing this wonderful meditation, a meditation in which we discover that we are meditation. We don't do meditation, that who we are that open sky of meditation.
Yeah, well, that's lovely. And yeah, again, anyone who wants to find out about the group, just send me a message on Facebook or send me an email. I'll try to, if I don't respond to the email quickly, I apologize. And yeah, so I'm gonna end the recording now. Thank you, Harvey.
You're very welcome.
All right.